One thing with the recipes, with cooking at least, not in terms of baking isn't very exact. You can change a few things, but with cooking, these are just a guide. If you don't like quinoa, I'm just going to say red quinoa, you could do something else. It's basically something to start with and then to go with it from there. If you don't have something, something's not available, change it. You don't like, walnut oil, change it to hazelnut oil. So it's to have fun. So we're going to try to have some fun today as well. Hopefully. What happened? So we have a couple of components of what we're doing today. We have the walnut vinaigrette, toasted walnuts. We have the red quinoa, the Maine yellow beans, which is an heirloom bean that's grown in Maine. That I get through one of my local farmers. So go through everything with you. First off, you have the radicchio. We're grilling the radicchio. So I'm going to do this first so I can move the pan. You can do it on a grill, or if at home you don't have a grill, you can do it with a grill pan, which we're going to do today. You take the radicchio, you cut it into 4 pieces. If it has a larger core, you want to take it up, but you still want to leave a little bit on here so it doesn't fall apart on you, and you can move it on the grill. You want your grill to be clean. It's very important with grilling. The biggest mistake people make with grills is not cleaning the grill. Be it doing steaks, burgers, anything. If you have a dirty grill, your food's going to stick and it's not going to get hot. I mean, you really want to get this really smoking hot, but you don't want to burn it as well. So you smooth, like anything else, we're going to season our vegetables. I use kosher salt. I don't use iodized salt at all. Besides the chemicals, with iodized salt, you have a tendency to, over-season. So you can always add more. If you add too much, you can't take. You can always add more. You can't take out. So if you're making anything where you see a lot of people will take the salt or pepper or any of the chili and they'll pour it over into the container, it's very easy for it just to pour out. So usually you do it into your hand or measure it. For pepper, we always use fresh pepper. Any ground spices that you buy in a store could be sitting on the shelf and through the warehouse even 2 to 3 years. So they're going to lose a lot of their essential oils and they lose all their flavor. So in terms of even like cumin, coriander seed, what we do here is we buy whole seeds, toast them, and grind them in a little coffee grinder. And the flavor, you do that, the flavor of that is so much better. I use fresh. I don't use any dry herbs at all. Nothing. So we're grilling that. So in the meantime, we're going to put together the 2 things that you can do ahead of time. I'm going to just explain this to you. Is the quinoa and the beans. The quinoa, you'll see there's a whole brief in there about quinoa. It's a very complete grain. There is a lot of protein in there as well, and it's gluten-free. So this is one thing, gluten-free. So with our beans, you can either use mushroom stock or water. We're going to use 2 to 1. So we're taking up, you can watching this. It's burning. All right, so we're going to add our beans. One thing when you're using heirloom beans or any heirloom or something that's grown locally, you need to go through it and look for stones. A lot of times they don't take all the stones out. They're missed, and if you cook it and you're making chili or something, you can break it too. So you really need to go through it, and we go through it pretty well. This is our red quinoa. There's 3 different types of quinoa. There's the red quinoa, white quinoa, and black quinoa. They're essentially the same plant, but they have a little bit of different flavor. The red quinoa is pretty much in the middle in terms of chewiness and flavor. The white quinoa is more neutral, and the black quinoa has got a more pronounced flavor. So we have our, in our pan, we're going to at least add some salt and pepper. Salt, both. Add some fresh pepper. Yeah. All right. We're going to add some fresh thyme. Just leave it on this sprig. So we add to this 2 whole shallots, a couple pieces of garlic, just left it whole. All right. Then we add water. You could use mushroom stock or even chicken stock. Water gives it a neutral flavor to it. But always start with cold water. So we can put it on a stove. You can bring it to a boil, and then let it simmer until they're tender. You're gonna have to keep tasting it. Some beans have a tendency to soak up a lot of moisture, so if you see it starting to get a little low, just add hot water to it. The reason why you want to add cold water is it's gonna slowly, it cooks it. when you add it brings out the flavors. If you're doing it with the hot water, it's just not gonna, the flavors are not gonna be there. As you see, this was the same, it's gonna double and triple in size and volume. You could do this ahead of time. This will hold up in the refrigerator 2 to 3 days. This is the quinoa, and these are the beans. You see how the beans change. When you refrigerate them, keep them in the liquid so they don't dry out and they stay moist. For the vinaigrette, same thing. The vinaigrette, you can make ahead of time. Most of these recipes, what I'm trying to do is make it easier for you. You can make stuff ahead of time, so if you're working or you're out all day, you can come home, just throw it and put it together. So for the dressing, with any dressings, make a little extra so you can use it ahead of time. We use these type of containers in the kitchen a lot, and they work well. So we're using a walnut oil. This is like almost like an extra virgin oil. You don't want to cook with this oil. It has a very low smoke point. Smoke point in oils are the temperature which is going to start burning. So extra virgin olive oil you really shouldn't cook with. Has a very low smoke point. Oils like peanut oil, soy oil, grapeseed oil have a very high smoke point. So if you're really sauteing, they'll get very high temperature to it. So this recipe's one thing also, which actually is important. With a lot of times with recipes, they'll say ounces. When I do a recipe, if it's liquid, I always put fluid ounces. Because if it's sometimes people put ounces, it could be in weight or fluids. So it's important that if it says fluid ounces or ounces, it says 16. So we're gonna have 16 ounces of walnut oil. This is the walnut, just to measure it out, 16 ounces of walnut oil. 2 shallots and garlic. It says chopped. If you have a blender, you basically just make it small enough that it'll get into the blades. Drop that in, and then garlic as much as or as little as you like. I mean, I like a lot of garlic, so I would normally put more. But for myself, champagne vinegar. I use champagne vinegar for a lot of recipes. It's a neutral vinegar. It adds acidity to it, but it's not overpowering like a balsamic or even a sherry vinegar. It's made with champagne. I mean, it's in the champagne, it's not with obviously the Dom Perignon, but it's made with champagne wine, and it has a lot of tender flavors. A little bit of salt. This will stay emulsified, but it won't stay emulsified for a long time, and then what you do is, as you use it, you need it the next day, you just shake it. So that's one of the reasons why we like these little containers. One thing that's missing in here, which I did forget on the recipe, is we're using toasted walnut halves or pieces. We've toasted them in the oven a little bit. I always add a little bit to the dressing. It gives a nice flavor to it. So that's a typo. My secretary was in there today. But to add that to a little fresh pepper. Before you refrigerate it, you always want to taste it. That's a little acidic, so I'm just going to add a little more oil to it. So
which oil is that? Sorry.
This is just a little. This is a neutral. It's an olive oil mix. So to make our salad, so you have our dressing. We have our lettuce. So we're going to take the radicchio, we're going to just cut it up. The radicchio is bitter, so depending on how much, if you like bitter greens, how much you're going to add. Usually for the recipe, what we do, it's about 1/3 of the radicchio. And add some mesclun greens, some mixed greens, just to mix it up a little bit. We're going to add some parsley leaves. This is flat Italian parsley. Some basil leaves, which you're going to rip up. Take a little bit of walnuts, break it up a little bit. And a little bit of the quinoa to mix it in. beans. When you're adding the beans or the quinoa, you don't want to add the liquid to it because it's going to thin out the dressing. Add some of the dressing.
So you're just adding a few teaspoons or tablespoons?
Right.
So
As much or as little as you want, you
I
know.
see, okay, but the recipe.
Right. I did as a guide more, but just a little bit of dressing. So we're gonna add we have our salad right here.
Right.
Kind of push it together a little bit. We're gonna take a little more of our quinoa and put it on top, because it is a quinoa salad. Okay. Then we're using Pecorino Romano cheese, which is from sheep in Italy, sheep milk cheese. And what we do is just use a vegetable peeler, and it'll peel right off and add it right to. You want to do this last minute. If you do this ahead of time, the cheese is going to dry out. The thing with this dish is you can make it in an oven. You have a slow cooker. You make it in a slow cooker. Make it ahead of time. You can freeze this dish. And one of the reasons why you'll see, if you go through the recipe, we cook our vegetables separate. I do that for 2 reasons. Number one is the meat's going to take longer than the vegetables. And a lot of the time, most people don't have time to add the vegetables as they're going because they're going to turn to mush. You lose a lot of the flavor of the vegetables. And then this way, if you do freeze it or do put it away, you can add the vegetables afterwards, and it's not going to. You still have its flavor. For the meat, we're using we have a leg that's been cleaned up. A little bit of fat, you want a little bit of fat on there, just to keep it moist. Otherwise, it's going to be a little dry. Cut up in cubes. Anytime you're cooking anything, you want everything cooked, cut in uniform sizes. If the different sizes, if you have something small or large, it takes different amount of cooking time. So if you have multiple sizes, the stuff that's cut small is going to get overcooked. The stuff that's large is going to be undercooked, and then you'll have some happy stuff in the middle. We have parsnips, and I'm going to show you. This is a King Bora radish, which is an heirloom radish. It's kind of has a turnip. It's a nice flavor to it. This is a purple top turnip, which is kind of sweet. We have carrots, and then we have locally grown purple potatoes. So you really everything wants to be uniform size. So like with the turnips and the carrots, we have kind of like it's a dice, but it's not quite a dice. So you just cut it at a 45-degree angle, turn it at about 45 degrees, and you cut, and you just keep cutting it at a 45-degree angle, and you see it's nice uniform sizes. Those cut meat to the radishes. We're just gonna cut the tops off. A lot of these vegetables, if they're grown in in nice form, the skin is not going to be thick, so you can really just eat the skin as well. You don't need to peel them. And then so just cut these, and so you get in different sizes. And that. Turnips do the same thing. And the purple potatoes, yeah. If you want to cut any of the vegetables ahead of time, something like a potato, the parsnips, you want to put it in water, cold water, because they're going to oxidize. So you got purple potato, yeah. So what we have is the recipe here. It's a basic recipe, 5 pounds. I don't have 5 pounds here, but 5 pounds of lamb. You can use AP flour. This is all-purpose flour. You can use no flour at all. The reason why we use the flour is just so it thickens it up. You can use, if you have a gluten allergy, you can use cornstarch, you could use cornmeal, different things. An onion, garlic, tomatoes, you can either use fresh. This time of year, there's no really good fresh tomatoes, so just take a good Italian canned tomato, which we're going to puree in the blender. Bouquet garni, which is thyme, bay leaves, and parsley. We're going to add that, and I'm using lamb stock. If you don't have lamb stock, you can use a combination of beef and chicken, or beef, or chicken, whatever you have. You can also add wine to the recipe. So this recipe is just the base, like I said before. You have your base, and then from there you can do a lot of different things. We can do this, as you can see. I'm going to try that. All right, so what we're going to do now with our lamb is we're going to season it with some salt. You know, I think that's a lot of salt, but it's really, it's not.
So salt and pepper before the flour?
Yeah. You don't want to put that much on. I mean, you just want enough to coat it. it's not 100% coated. You can also when you take it out. Okay. What you're going to want to do with this is get a decent amount of oil in it so it doesn't stick.
All-purpose oil.
All-purpose oil. So, or you can do it in the oven, do it in an oven-proof dish, which we're going to do, or you can do it in an oven-proof pan with a cover. It's got to be covered. Or you can do it on top of the stove if you're very careful, and you have to watch it so it doesn't burn. So we're going to dice this in large dice. Remove this piece, let me just think. This we can cut it in half. And outside. Then what we're going to do is we're going to cut it this way, but that only goes about 3/4 of the way. Okay. And we're going to cut it down depending on the size of the dice we want. Same thing, not going all the way through. And then with a rock, you don't want to be using you're really just moving your wrist. When you have your fingers, you keep your thumb behind, your fingers with your points back, and then moving your fingers back slowly. Okay, so we're gonna. Yeah, I mean.
So you didn't even toss the meat with the flour?
I did a little bit. I did it with a spoon. Normally, I wear a glove and just I toss it, but you don't need to. So we're burning our meat. You can hear it. The one thing also is you don't want to add too much to your pan, because what's happening is as you're adding to the pan, it's dropping the temperature of the oil. And if you add too much, it cools the oil down, and you're actually just boiling the meat in the oil. But have everything ready. We have our mix. We have our lemon thyme again, actually our mix. Okay, we're gonna add you can chop up the thyme. I'm just gonna throw it in. You can take it out. Our bay leaves, leave whole. And some fresh parsley.
Fresh bay leaves?
No, these are dry. Very hard to find fresh bay leaves. You can get them, but you have to keep them frozen. Then he's going to sweat it. We're going to add our pureed tomatoes.
Do you have a preference for canned tomatoes?
No, you want to use a good, Italian tomato. Everyone's, Marzano, but there's actually an area south of there that grows a really good canned tomato. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. But you want to use a good quality tomato.
What about the seeds?
I just puree everything. There's not that much good tomatoes and seeds.
Is that the seeds in that probably pure?
Yeah. But even actually we did it in the food processor. That's what I did. So the seeds on these are pretty soft. So then we're just going to add our lamb gravy to it. Broth. Make everything. I don't buy anything.
Did you add tomato paste?
No, pureed tomatoes. I pureed them in the blender.
Oh, okay, because you have tomato paste on.
Oh, you can. Yeah, you can use either one.
Okay, so you don't need both.
No, you can use one or the other. Okay. So what I do with the vegetables, and I don't need to show you, what I do is I usually just toss them, a little salt and pepper, some blended oil. If you want to add some chopped shallots and garlic at the time, and you bake them in a 375 oven. And to heat them up, just mix them together, and then we'll place them on.
How long you bake them for?
Till they're tender.
Okay.
Honestly, anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes. Depends on how thin you cut them. Something like this is going to cook in maybe 15. Something like this is going to cook 35.
So you cook them in a separate
Pans.
pan?
And separate together. I mean, if you want to do them together,
Just cut them the same size?
cut them the same size. If you're doing root vegetables like this, they're generally going to take about the same time. If you're doing some like summer squash, that's going to be very quick.
Yeah.
So you can almost even just saute it.
Oh, for sure.
Right. So what you're going to do with this is you're going to take our meat. You can just pour it over into this. And you want to check the seasoning again, salt and pepper. And then you're basically going to cook this. You're going to cover it. You want it to come to a boil before you put it in here. You're going to cover it. then you're gonna bake it over.
No, thank you.
You want to go, it's everything with barbecue. You're talking about barbecue. It's called low and slow. So you want to do the same thing. You don't want to push it. You want the muscle fibers in the meat because you're using a tougher piece of meat with a lot of flavor. It takes a long time. So you want to, if you cook it too fast, it's going to get hard and chewy. So you want to go slow so the meat breaks down and takes a lot of flavor. Normally, the best thing to do is let it cook. I prefer serving it the next day. So what you do is you refrigerate it. What happens is you refrigerate, all the fat will come to the top. You take all the fat off, and it'll have, by having the flour on it, you'll see it'll be thicker gravy, and without the grease. A lot of times you eat stew right away, or pot roast. It's kind of oily. It's because it hasn't sat. And you really, even if you skim it, you're never going to get it off if it gets refrigerated.
So you're cooking it 100%, and then
Yes.
bring it to
What you want to do
temperature,
is,
and then
you want it to cool. When cooling, the best way to cool something, if you're doing like in a tall pot, is to spread it out. The more surface area it has, you want it to cool down because there's something. So what we're using for the cookies is, so it's a basic recipe. It's basically you're taking everything, just putting it in the food processor. So you got our ginger snap cookies, regular ginger snap cookies. The fancy they come in a bag instead of a box, but the old food processor. Yes. So then you just add our sugar. We're gonna add the sugar to it. And it's all pre-made. One thing when you're doing a recipe in cooking, it's called mise en place, means everything in place. You want to have everything measured out before you do anything correctly. So we're going to take this now. And you pour it into your bowl. You can. I mean, this we just, the melted we did it. For this part we did it.
now,
One thing, like I was saying before, which is, this is actually a good point, is baking is really an exact science.
right.
There's no, if it's it says, the recipe says something, and you use teaspoons instead of tablespoons, or it's just not gonna work. It doesn't work. Because baking, as much as food, cooking is chemical reactions, baking is very scientific. It's really, you need to measure exactly. So we're making this, we're gonna add, so you want it to be, this is, you probably need a little more butter, but you really want it so it sticks together, you can pack it in. For this, we're gonna use, so one of the things to show you can do is in almost anything, is we're putting it into just some ceramic dishes. You can use cheesecake molds, you can use a large one, a spring form, you can use, we have silicone pads, which are, so what you're gonna do, if you have this, you're just gonna take a little butter, or even some Pam, and you're gonna just coat this so it comes out. Put that on the bottom, you're gonna take your crust and put it on the bottom. You wanna pack it in. Nice layer, you don't wanna do it too thick. Then we're gonna make our mix. Just using Philly cream cheese. It's important that you use a good quality cream cheese. Philly is a pretty good brand, it's readily available. So what we're going to do first is you add the cream cheese and the goat cheese. We do use Crabtree goat cheese, local around here. Let's show you if you want to just use something like Coach Farms. You want to use a soft cheese that doesn't have kind of a neutral flavor to it. If you don't like goat cheese, you want to make it Italian style, you can add some ricotta cheese to it. Just going to pour this in. All right.
Yeah, I never saw it done then.
And then what you want to do then is just to get a little, to bang it a little bit to get the air bubbles out. Another reason it don't crack is because of the air bubbles.
What was that?
Another reason to make crack is it makes it cool too fast. You're there.
No, I'm, are you putting that on top of the stove and on?
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this pan in here. I'll, put as many as I put in there. I'm gonna fill it about 3/4 of the way with hot water. What I do, you don't have to do this, is I put it on the stove on a burner and let it come to a simmer, and then put it in the oven.
Okay.